Morena tātou. Welcome everybody to this inaugural meeting of the Taranaki Passenger Transport Joint Committee. As usual, the first things when we set up a new council or a new committee is establishing a chair, and just until I'll guide us through that process until we get a chair, and then we'll fill the important seat over here and you'll hear less of me, which is always a good thing. E kara kia timatanga, wakatokti hau ki te uru, wakatokti hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā tara tara ki tai, kia i haki ki kura, e tio, e uka, e ahu, te turu o witi wakamawa, kia tina, tina, hui, tāki. For those who, I think most of us have been here before, but those that haven't, we've got, if the health and safety, if the evacuation sirens go off, our nearest emergency exit is off to my left through the committee room and down the stairs, and follow the staff and we'll take you to the congregation point, and normal earthquake will drop, cover and hold, and if necessary we'll evacuate after that. Bathrooms are down the stairs to your right, and we've got tea and coffee over here, and hopefully very shortly hot cross buns, and we'll make yourselves, you're welcome to grab those at any stage. Okay, so the first item on our, we have no apologies today. Neil Holden. Can I have a mover and a second for the apologies? Second. Thank you. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Thank you. So the first item is the election of a chair and a deputy chair. And you have a paper there in front of you that sets out the processes per the Local Government Act and legislation, and largely depends on whether we have more than one candidate for each position, and then we've got a process to hold elections if we don't. In the first instance, can I call for nominations for the position of chair of our committee?
Before you do that, Mr. Chairman, might I just make a suggestion, Mr. Acting Chairman?
Principal Advisory Officer.
Principal. Thank you. I knew you'd have a title of some sort, Mike.
Thank you.
It seems to me that as a joint committee, it would make sense if the chair and deputy chair were from each party, rather than it might be the occasion where both were elected from the district council or both were elected from the regional council. But it just would make sense to me that whichever one is the chair, the other one would be the deputy.
Sound advice, Councillor. The only comment I make is this is a joint committee of all four councils. It isn't just, but noting that the regional council.
I wasn't meaning. Oh, sorry, I was meaning regional council and district.
One of the district council. Understood. Understood. Thank you.
Also, just to note that Mayor Holden has, I'm his alternate today, but he's also said that
Okay.
And I see that Susan's put her hand up.
Well,
I have.
Susan.
I agree with what Harry has said, but I'd like to nominate Alan for the position of chair.
I'd be happy to second that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Principal, was it Advisory Officer?
Yeah. Mr. Neil will be more than sufficient. Thank you. Are there any further nominations for the position of chair?
Just a query, and I mean, I support Alan, but a query is, would there be a perceived conflict?
We had this conversation at our last council meeting when we were discussing the regional council representatives on this joint committee. The conflict of interest arises from a pecuniary interest, gaining a financial advantage from being in a position. this committee has no decision-making powers, and as such it only recommends to the 4 councils. So that ability to gain that interest is very, very limited. So when we were appointing Alan to the committee, the council was of the view that there wasn't a conflict of interest.
Thank you. Happy with that explanation?
And beyond that, I think there's real value in having someone who's got many years of experience within the industry, and hope that that can be balanced by other perspectives.
Wolski?
Thank you. But I'm more than happy with Alan to chair it, but it's not just a matter of whether there's a conflict, but whether there's perceived conflict. So trust Alan's integrity. If he did have one, he'd clear it, but the public perception perceived is just as important as real.
Yeah.
But having said that,
Noted. And the observation I'll make is that later on in the agenda we've got an item that talks about future meeting dates, and so at this stage all the recommendation is for future meeting dates. The next one is actually post the election, so we'll have 4 new councils, 4 new sets of councillors, and the opportunity to revisit that at that point, should that actual or perceived conflict of interest materialise, exists.
And just in following up with that, I do operate a bus and do a private school run, which I've done for the last 15 or 20 years. So I have one bus in the shed and I operate a service, but I am not in no means looking for any other work or tendering for any coming contracts or anything like that. I'm quite happy with my one little private run, and that's where it ends. But in the past, obviously, I have operated 60 buses and made them work. So I'm not looking to expand in any way or go for any contracts that any of the councils or regional have up.
Unless there's any further discussion, we've got one nominee, in which case I'll confirm Councillor Alan Jamieson as the chair of the committee and ask him to come up and take over from me. I've had enough.
Oh, so you're not standing for council?
Quite correct. you are braver people than I am in putting yourself in front of the public.
it's quite good that you should give a hospital pass, Mike, considering that you received one previously.
So,
Thank you.
Chair, we're in your hands.
Thank you for that. Now we're looking to fill the role of the deputy chair of this new committee, and so I'll open it up for nominations for deputy chair.
Chairman, I'd like to Curtis.
Thank you, Councillor Donhoven. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Mayor Volsky. Are there any other nominations for the position of deputy chair? Take it not. Congratulations, Amanda. You've been elected as a deputy chair, and hopefully between us we'll be able to look at the progress of things going forward. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which you'll find on tab 6 in your agenda, which is the terms of reference for this committee.
Chair, before you progress on, I've just had a request from Councillor Hughes. Have we all got our mics turned on? Councillor Hughes was struggling to hear some. You should all have a green light on your mics if they're on. Councillor Hughes was just struggling to hear. Sorry.
Thank you. In terms of reference, are you going to introduce this, Mike? Or as
Chair, very happy to do so.
Excuse me, there's actually some more recommendations in that first one. We've appointed a chair and a deputy chair, but should there not be resolutions for the rest of it?
Sorry. There's also, are you appointing the position of the alternates? Is that strictly up to council? They're not appointed.
So you've got those recommendations there. So receiving the paper, noting the process, electing Councillor Jamieson as chair, electing
Clinton Goldis.
yeah, apologies, I always get the double barrel.
That's all right.
Mucked up.
It's taken me a few years to get used to it too.
And then the other determines that decisions are recognised as not significant in terms of the Government Act and the decision-making principles are complied with.
The mover for the recommendations A to F.
Happy to move.
Mayor Nixon, seconded. Councillor Dinovan. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Now we'll move on to the next tab, which is tab 6, page 8 in the agenda, which is the terms of reference for the joint committee.
Chair, thank you. Very happy to introduce this item. So, this committee was a suggestion that came out of the submissions we received when we were going through our regional land transport plan, our long-term plan, and our regional passenger transport plan. And indeed, it may well have been a better as well in the single-stage business case. Anyway, we heard on a number of occasions the desire to have a joint committee able to look at some of the, in particular, some of the passenger transport issues that arise in our region. And the Regional Council, and receiving that feedback, agreed with that recommendation, and we then commenced the process of forming this committee. So we've drafted up terms of reference. It's been through the 4 councils. Initially it was ourselves and NPDC that drafted it, but it has been through the other 2 councils, and indeed it was the suggestion through that process to extend the membership to all 4 councils and look at the membership of the committee, extending the membership to include New Zealand Transport Agency, Waka Kotahi, a representative of users, and a representative from Naiwi or Taranaki. So we've done that, and that terms of reference is there in front of you. Very happy to answer any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions regarding terms of reference?
So just to comment on the voting membership, 2 members appointed by TRC, yep. There's actually 3 members from New Plymouth, which I totally support, and then 1 from each of us in an alternate, which I've got my deputy as an alternate, no doubt Neil has, Waka Kotahi and Naiwi o Taranaki. So there must be another New Plymouth person, NPDC person, because it's saying there the mayor and a member plus an alternate. So New Plymouth's alternate is now the deputy chair.
No.
Is that correct? Because that's
no,
what.
It'll be the other permanent, I think.
Sorry?
The other permanent member from New Plymouth will be the deputy chair.
Okay. It was just before that Amanda announced that she was the permanent alternate. Now she's been made the deputy chair, so I'm just wanting to clarify exactly where we're at
Chair,
to also be fair to New Plymouth.
Yeah, my understanding is, and the district members is that the mayors are there as of right through legislation and all committees. Mayor Holdham has indicated that he doesn't wish to participate, and so is using the alternate permanently. Yep. So New Plymouth District Council will only have 2 members.
Okay.
On an ongoing basis, and correct me if I'm wrong, New Plymouth District Council members, but that's my understanding of the situation.
My understanding too.
Through you, Chair, it means, I think it means that there's 8 people sitting at the table. Correct in saying that. There's 2 from TRC, 2 from New Plymouth, 1 from Stratford and South, and 1 from NZTA and Iwi. 8 people, and they could be substituted by alternates.
Correct. And that's the voting membership, and then there's a non-voting advisory membership being one member to represent passenger transport users on the next page of your agenda.
Yeah.
So it'll be 9 in total, 8 voting and 1 non-voting.
Okay. Right. Okay.
No, thank you.
I've got just one question then, just follows on from that. The non-voting advisory membership. When I read that, my first sort of feeling was, good, we've got a representative from the passenger users. I think that's sort of user groups, and I sort of imagine somebody who's potentially involved with people who use the bus on a day-to-day basis and kind of gets that nitty-gritty down-to-earth feeling. And then I looked at the paragraph that followed that, and it talks about experience in public transport sector and connections and to the vulnerable users, education, and I kind of thought, does that actually sound like a user, or is it kind of getting more into some sort of advisory role? And then when I go further on there and we look at how we're going to appoint this person and choose them, it's got all sorts of specifications for the person. You're going to find Superman to find this guy or person, and I actually thought to myself, none of us, I would expect, I don't think any of us here would fit that description, and yet we're going to make that a requirement of this person. So I guess my question is the title right, or is the job description or person specification wrong? Because it doesn't, the title reads nicely. It's a representative of people using it. I get that, and I think that's a good thing. But I don't know whether the person description later on actually fits that title.
But that's a group of specifications. You wouldn't expect any one person to meet all of those specifications, would you?
No.
No, that'd be very difficult.
I think you would be looking for someone that met most of them, or a good proportion of them, and you would be then choosing the best person from that. Would be my take on it. Do you think you need to change the specifications?
No, I'm just wondering about the practicalities of trying to find that individual, and is the title fitting? To me, it sounds more like a technical advisor or a policy analyst kind of role rather than a consumer representative.
So I think when we were having the discussions about the terms of reference, that wasn't what we were talking about. It was more about a user representative. I'm just wondering, with this terms of reference, we've kind of got a reference to some of the skills that they might need in the terms of reference, but then we've also got the skills matrix outside of it, which is sitting further on in the agenda. I'm just wondering whether it might be cleaner to delete the second sentence in that paragraph so that it just says the Joint Committee will seek applications for non-voting advisory member position. Oh, sorry, the third sentence. Applications will be assessed against a skills matrix to determine the most suitable candidate for the position, full stop. And then if we take out that reference to experience in the public transport sector, etc., then we are just defining the skills that we're looking for in the actual skills matrix rather than having the debate twice. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes some sense, actually.
Yeah, I would think that's an improvement, I would think.
Yeah.
Okay, so happy to remove that final sentence on that, okay.
Thank you, Chair. And then just one final one on this one for me. In the quorum, which is in the paragraph that follows, talks about odd and even numbers. So the committee we've just agreed on has 8 voting members. So when we're talking about the quorum, it talks about will consist of half of the members. So are we including the non-voting member there or not? Which would make a difference whether the quorum is either 5 people or 4 people. Yeah. So
I think it should be excluding the non-voting member,
I would think so too.
so that you would have a quorum of half of the voting members.
I think it would be clearer if we stated whether that non-voting member was part of the quorum or not part of it. And I'm easy either way, but I just think it'd be easier.
Okay, so non-voting is excluded from the quorum number, so it'll be a quorum of 4.
Yeah.
Quorum.
Happy with that?
And
Or
when it says including vacancies,
If a quorum,
what does that mean, like practically speaking?
Chair, so if you add in the word voting, so a quorum will consist of half of the voting members, including vacancies. So you're talking about 8 people, so a quorum would be half.
Right, even if we hadn't, say, appointed and
Yeah,
a
so
member from Naimi or Taranaki,
yeah,
well, it's still,
so
okay.
you had 7 people around the table, 1 missing.
Yeah.
Okay, quorum's still 4.
4. Thank you.
happy with that?
To add in voting members? Yeah.
Okay. The recommendation we have is that we receive and note the Taranaki Passenger Transport Joint Committee terms of reference with those addition to the quorum specified and the removal of that final clause with regard to the user applicant. Like, I'll put that, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
I better have a mover first.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Have it move it, Lennox, and seconded by Mr. Clinton Gobes. All those in favour, please say aye.
aye.
Against? Carried, thank you very much. Move on to the next one, which is our proposed meeting dates.
Yeah, so the terms of reference which you just adopted talks about quarterly meetings. We've had a look at some dates and times. The only issue is you're running up into elections, and do you have work that you particularly want to attend to this side of the elections? So the suggestion there, recommendation there, is that we meet post the election on the 4th of December, and we're giving each council the opportunity to make its appointments, and then you can set the dates for 2026 at that meeting, and we'll get into your quarterly or other cycle. There's absolutely no issue about squeezing in another meeting ahead of the election if that's the views of the committee.
I just had a question about timeframes for making a call around the high frequency service routes and what whether we might need a meeting before that December 1 or not. I'm just not sure how the timeframes would work.
You've always got a view on it too, I think.
Oh, I didn't really have a view. I just made the point to Alan earlier that given the fact that this committee is actually not making decisions, it's only making recommendations, I don't see that the election should impact on our ability to meet. And if there's work that needs to be progressed in the meantime, it can be. That was all. So if there's a need to have a meeting sooner than 8 months from now, then we should schedule one.
And I agreed with that as well, I thought so.
Yeah.
Whether we can schedule one and get that suits the 4 councils, I don't know if we have a date that, bit of a time frame from now.
Chair, I'm just looking at at our 2 advisors that are working on this.
Yes.
I'm trying and just assessing their level of comfort with it.
Through the chair, the idea for the high frequency route is really to be, I guess, at the same time as the new network is rolled out and how it's phased. And I understand that the new network may be itself rolled out in different phases from April next year. So we'd like the trial at least to start from April. So we'd probably need some pre-planning and the technical requirements of setting up a operator and contract at the same time as the new network contracts process is occurring like that. So I need Cheryl to advise me when the contracting process would likely to be for the new network.
through you, Chair, we're working now, just keep busy. I think it's certainly once that's sorted, which, I mean, potentially in a month's time, sorry, I'm just working backwards from April. There's no reason why Stuart and I can't then pay the high frequency and full attention.
Just through you, Chair, could we perhaps let the officers do their process, look at some dates and come back to us on that one? But I think there appears to be a willingness from the meeting to have a meeting.
Right.
Yeah, which sort of slots into the quarterly program.
Happy with that, Cheryl? We can squeeze one in.
Happy to come back with
Okay.
some dates.
Thank you.
Certainly, Chair. So what I'm taking from that is if there's a need for some input from this committee to that, in particular the high frequency trial ahead of December, then we'll look to schedule a meeting earlier.
Thank you. And we will still have the one scheduled for the 4th of December.
Yep.
At this stage as well for after the election. Thank you. So the recommendations we have are that we receive the proposed meeting date of the 4th of December and look at scheduling one between that. We will, our staff will liaise and let us know when it would best fit, if you like. And then the other two recommendations, that it's determined as non-significant and it meets the decision-making process. So with that, I'll put those recommendations. I have a mover, please. Nixon, seconded by. I'll second it. Mayor Volsky. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Now we move on to the skill matrix of the appointing of a non-voting advisory member. And obviously there's some changes within that are required from our previous parts.
Would it make sense to, in sub B, the recommendations be and or? Because you're simply never going to get all of those skills in one person, are you?
No.
Hell no.
So add the and or to each of the categories.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Any other views?
Yeah, in recommendation D, I suggest that we don't name a councillor there, we just leave it as the chair will represent the Taranaki Passenger Transport Joint Committee in interviews. Otherwise, every time you elect a new chair, you've got to change that. So by the 4th of December, that might be already changed.
Yeah.
So I think if it can be just chair.
Okay. I'm
also keen to see a district council representative in that process as well, and wonder if in fact the rest of you have the same view. I just think it widens the excuse me, the scope for consideration.
I think that's a sensible idea.
It is very sensible. So
I am generally sensible, just saying.
If we add chair and deputy chair, that should cover it.
Yeah. Why don't you do that?
Hoping
Yeah,
that
that makes sense.
okay. And with the add or any other changes to that matrix at this stage?
Following on from the previous conversation and the question raised around public transport sector knowledge, I'm pretty comfortable with the and or because I think that kind of covers it. But just the question to the room, I guess, of whether we're comfortable with that wording because it sort of sounds a little bit like more a practitioner skill than a representative skill, and whether maybe we can tweak the wording a little or whether actually the and or covers it.
I would suggest the and or does cover it because the first bullet point is user representation and advocacy, which is obviously a consumer of the product. And there might be someone who comes along who has significant public transport sector knowledge, and we'd be balancing which of the two we in fact needed at the table. if they had contrasting skill sets, but nevertheless within the matrix.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just speaking in support of Susan's comments there, when I read that, I thought, this person doesn't exist, but and/or allows them to have part of, and then the appointment group can assess if they've got parts of this. The appointment group can assess which is the best combination. They might have one or two boxes ticked, but not the others. And I think there's enough there with the first one, the user representation and advocacy, and the last one, commitment and engagement. That is open enough, I think, to allow sort of Joe Bloggs off the street to, who's got an interest, to put his name forward if he chooses.
Or Josephine.
Or Josephine, sorry,
Joe
Susan.
in the general sense.
The other question I had, do we have a time frame on this? This is
I was just, you're 2 seconds ahead of me as usual. Which is
I don't know about that.
So the steps going forward here, we're looking to do this and speak to Ngāiwi or Taranaki about their representative to align with the elections so that for them, we've got them for a 3-year term for the next December meeting onwards.
Okay, thank you.
So over the next few months we'll run a process. We'll get the chair and deputy chair and do some interviews and come up with a recommendation. And at the same time as we do the iwi representatives for our 2 policy and planning and consents and regulatory committee, we'll do this committee as well at the same time with Ngāiwi or Taranaki.
Thank you.
Can I also just suggest perhaps that in the forming of the short list that the chair and deputy chair are also involved, because the process speaks to just the advisor doing that, but I think it would be good to have elected member input as well.
Yeah, thank you. I don't envisage that we're going to be
Inundated.
with candidates,
A
but
flood of unicorn applicants.
We look forward to it.
Yeah.
if we get 2 or 3 really good candidates, that would be nice.
It would be nice.
Make sure she's a suitable person. Sure she will be.
Okay. So we have a time frame, we have a and/or in the skill matrix, and we're going to have the chair and deputy sitting on the appointment process and shortlisting of candidates. So the recommendations from A to F will show that. We receive the matrix with the change of wording, approve the skills that are required and the appointment process, etc., and recognise again it's non-significant and determine that decision making meets the local government standards. I'll put those recommendations. We have a mover for those things.
Yep.
Mr. Twin Globes and Councillor Donhoven seconds. And all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to the NZTA update on the government policy statement and priorities for public transport. There is a presentation, and I take it Linda.
That will be me.
Yeah.
There's only a few slides as well, really just to set the scene for us all.
Okay.
So just first up, the kind of context that we're working on is set, like with all land transport investment, through the government priority statement for land transport. When it comes to the priorities, as we're all well aware, in this GPS, the current coalition government, it's very clear that their priorities are on the roads of national significance, as well as returning the state highway and local road assets back to improved standard. So when we think about that in our work today in public transport, we are operating in a more constrained funding environment than perhaps we have seen previously. I would just note, though, that the investment in public transport across the whole country has actually gone up. So in this NLTP, it's 3.7 billion in public transport versus the previous one, which was 2.6 billion. So there's still a significant investment in public transport overall. And also you've got additional investment of 2.6 billion in infrastructure. But the emphasis in the GPS is that is largely being invested in the big metros. And they're very clear about their priorities for that investment and what they want to see from it, particularly around economic growth, productivity, and increasing passenger numbers, reducing congestion so that it's working hand in hand with RLTPs within the large metros. For the rest of the country, what that simply means is we're more about maintaining the services that we have currently, as well as looking to the future and how we position to then take advantage once priorities do begin to shift in terms of the investment. There are a couple of other areas contained within that that come through in the Taranaki Regional Council report, so I'll not go into any detail on those. But it is important to note that the priorities within public transport also include diversification of funding. So there is quite a significant piece of work by all of the public transport, the PTAs, to look at how we increase private share. So reducing the burden on both the taxpayer and ratepayer, if you like. Also, the shift to one way of paying for public transport, which is the national ticketing system as well as making that an improved experience for users. It'll also help to generate much higher quality data to help inform decision making around tables like this, which is good. Just in the roles and responsibilities for public transport, it does differ a little bit from an NZTA perspective. We are the regulator as well as here to support planning. And I say support because it's probably the most decentralised of all of our functions, in that we're not a provider or operator of public transport. That is all given effect to via the PTAs, which are largely, apart from one, regional councils or unitary authorities across the country. We're really here primarily to partner and to support with our PTAs, particularly on the long-term planning, but also around things like procurement. I would note as well that the PTAs have got quite a substantial piece of work with us around reviewing some of those system processes and functions, particularly when it comes to our procurement and how we operate public transport across the country. And then the last one is probably the most kind of important and practical of it. While the PTAs by and large tend to be regional councils, the need to look at how your public transport system functions right across the region can't be overstated. And that's why a strong regional view and regional leadership is critical. The key for all of us as partners in here is to ensure that we've got a strategic line of sight over things like our urban development or any city or town regeneration, where the commercial businesses are, where new housing developments are, how we want our people in our places to function, and making sure that they're not at odds with both road transport, but importantly, not everybody has access to that or wishes to use that mode of transport, public transport. I would as well say that within that, there's also other levers that sit within district councils and city councils that needs to be considered as well. So that's things like route prioritisation through your town centres and CBDs, and also as well, obviously, things like parking. So you have levers at your use that the PTA can't control, but that's, again, one of the important parts of getting together and looking at our regional public transport plan in the long term to how we give best effect to achieving the outcomes that as a region you're seeking from public transport. That's all I've got. Happy to
Lovely.
take any questions.
Are there any questions, Stuart?
Thank you. In a spirit of optimism.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got bucket loads of that.
Yeah. I just, if you can, could you flick back a couple of slides on it?
First one.
The first one, yeah. Around that value for money, contributing less to congestion and increased patronage. With some of our routes that are more popular and are along more congested routes, and I'm thinking about the connector, I'm thinking about the Waitara route and potentially an increased Bell Block route. Is there any possibility that we could make an argument around congestion and increased patronage for those, or are we talking like, yeah, New Plymouth, Taranaki congestion is not congestion on a nationwide scale?
I think context is everything. I think when it comes to especially the funding side of it and decision making, it's never just on one part or on one kind of factor. So that absolutely is a consideration within the kind of move to improve the public transport services. There's only good things to be gained, and probably more so from a safety perspective. It is the safest form of travel to getting more people out of their cars and onto buses. So it absolutely is an important point. Yes, the congestion is not to the same scale as somewhere like Auckland, but it is still congestion. It still has an impact on getting people and products and services to where they need to get to. So it does add some weighting to it. In this NLTP period, though, there's no wiggle room. So we'd be preparing for the next one.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any further? I take it not. The recommendation that we have, just receive a note. Oh, Councillor Donovan.
Sorry, slow on the uptake, Mr. Chairman.
No problem.
The question occurs to me in terms of the overall budget for passenger transport, public passenger transport. And although the funding overall has gone up, because so much of it is concentrated on the metros, the funding that we have has, in fact, if I'm understanding it correctly, we're struggling to keep the existing services at the level that they are, let alone have any new services. And that seems to me to be counterproductive to what's been spelled out by the government in the government policy statement last year. Because one of the major themes was about improving efficiency, improving the economy, and reducing compliance costs, etc., etc. If we are unable, even with the New Plymouth District Council's increased input, to afford, and we'll come to this later on in Cheryl's presentation, I'm sure, to afford an additional route or a new high-frequency route, etc. It does seem to me that the lack of funding for development in the regions means that we tread water at the very best, and that must be completely the opposite of what the government has intended with the government policy statement. So how does NZTA and the Minister equate that in terms of that policy statement? Because lots of things are being done which line up, but this is completely opposite.
Not wanting to speak to the policy or the politics of it, but obviously we're here to give effect to it. At a very basic level, it is simply return on investment. So just now, given it is the largest national land transport investment that the country's seen, but it is very specific on where and how. And when it comes to public transport, that has been focused on where we can get the biggest return from a value for money and from an outcomes perspective initially. So not to say that in the next NLTP period, once we've got some of the RONs underway, we've got CRL up in Auckland going, those kind of things, that then money will better flow across the wider country. I think the critical thing for us here is to make sure that we can use this time to set ourselves up for the future. It's the hand that we have.
So treading water is not a bad analysis.
Thank you.
It's yours.
She didn't say no, did she?
It's not mine.
Thank you, Councillor Donovan. So the recommendation we have is that we receive a note to the NZTA update on the government policy statement and priorities for public transport. I'll move that if I have a second. Councillor Mayor Nixon, sorry. Those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. We'll move on to item 10, which is the public transport service update. You'll find on page 20, or tab 10. And with that, I'll pass it on to Mike to introduce this before he hands it on to Cheryl.
Thank you,
Thank
Chair.
you.
Thank you, Stuart, for introducing and setting the scene nicely, because it leads to the very practical and operational challenges that Cheryl and the team face. So, step back a year or two. We've been hearing for a long time now that there is a desire within the Taranaki community to improve the level and frequency of public transport services. And it was very clearly, we were working through with NZTA Whakakotahi at the time, through our single stage business case with exactly that approach being adopted. We saw this as a step change opportunity to take Taranaki public transport services to the next level. We have had a change of government and we have a new GPS, and the realities of that is that will not be achievable in the current term of the GPS. So the approach that we've adopted, and treading water is probably not a bad analogy, but it's holding steady and taking the opportunities as they occur. We've got the plan of attack to get us to the next levels, and we talked about bronze, silver and gold standards of public transport. The reality is we're going to struggle even to get to bronze at the moment with funding levels and the cost of operating passenger transport services, but we are committed to increasing those over time as the opportunities arise. What I see the real power of this committee is pulling everybody together, so it's not just the regional council as a service provider or service contractor, but it is our territorial authorities, it is Whakakotahi, it is our other stakeholders coming to the party and saying, well, what levers can we pull, working with the regional council's mandates and what it can do, that we can operate as one, so that those incremental steps can be larger and quicker than we may otherwise get. And Mr. Stewart talked about the district planning obligations, which probably will lead into spatial planning in the not too distant future. Strategies around who has priorities, strategies around parking, all those sorts of things, are all things that come to the table along with our commitments to improving and increasing public transport services that lead us to be in the best possible space at such time as a GPS gets reviewed and we've got additional funding hopefully will become available at that point. So that's the sort of strategic scene setting from as we see it. I'll now hand over to Cheryl who will take you through as she tries to operationalise all of those challenges to give an update on where we're at with PT.
Thank you. So through you, Chair. Yes, trust me, I ring my finance advisor at NZTA most days. I think he's going to block me shortly. I do continually fight and ask for ways and means on how possibly potentially obtain a tiny bucket of funding here or there. My understanding at this time is, line your ducks up and set yourself up as ready to to go, and I think we've actually put ourselves in a good position to do that. And now kind of the fight, if you will, begins for that funding. The response that I seem to be getting is that we need to prove missed opportunities. So we must do the work behind the scenes to get the best service that we can at this time with this funding. But if there is a missed opportunity, then that is something that I can move forward with. So I guess that's where this committee really does come in handy. We'll get it to a certain point, but what are we missing and why? And I think from a district council perspective, and then of course the regional perspective, we can build that case up quite nicely. And that can sit there as a missed opportunity and the potential for a little bit of funding. So that's where I'll need your help.
So almost like a prioritised wish list if and when the funding comes available.
Yes, but very much on focused on why it's a missed opportunity, as in, you know, value for money. All of those things get lumped into this is quite a spectacular opportunity that we're missing because.
Yep.
So if you think about the growth that's happening Waitoa, Bell Block into New Plymouth, the congestion, the Taranaki scale congestion we've got on the State Highway 3 as we move out, in and out of the urban area, that's a missed opportunity to look at improved public transport services and taking cars off that road, taking the congestion off that road through improved routes and frequency of services in there. So that's what Cheryl's talking about.
Yeah. I would think too, I mean, I know we've increased the connector services substantially, but I'd also think that a similar argument could be made for the connector, especially when you're talking about safety issues, say Inglewood, that an argument could be made there too.
Yep, absolutely.
And congestion on the state highway, which then hampers, you know, other forms of transport.
So my report really is, as Mike stated, it just operationalises everything that's just spoken about and how we're best trying to move forward with a positive frame of mind, actually. So I covered our ongoing developments, we'll read about those, the private share that Stuart touched on, and of course current operational levers that we can pull, particularly around, you know, our low patronaged services. How can we do them better? Again, it's about value for money and share expectations and obligations. Happy to take any questions. Anybody wants to discuss anything further?
Through you, Chair. Just a couple of comments, really. On page 30 of our agenda, there's a table that shows adult and youth fare examples by zone. And I note in the italics below it that you're talking about rounding up fares, rounding them up, 5-cent fares, rounding them up to the nearest 10 cents. Wouldn't it just be simpler for people to understand if you just put the fare to the 10 cents to not round anything?
Through you, Chair, we will. This was just an in-house opportunity to show you how we arrived at cost and how we tried very hard to stick to that percentage. So no, the fares will not.
Okay, thank you. I'm pleased to see common sense has prevailed. Not all that common nowadays, of course. The other one I just wanted to just highlight or make a comment on was on page 32, and it's listed as, it's a table there, number 39, statistical summary of existing bus services for the last financial year. It talks about each service and the patronage. Are we on the same page? Yep. Just correct me if I'm wrong here, but just in understanding the table, we've got our patronage numbers. Revenue is the money gathered from Farebox and any advertising on that bus service, correct? and then operating expenditure is obviously that. The difference between the two is what is paid for by ratepayers through the levy we put on people. That's correct. Yeah. It's interesting.
Chair, it's funded half from 51% from FAR,
right.
from Moka Kotahi, and 49% from
Okay.
targeted rates.
Yep, thanks. But if you took revenue away from expenditure and the difference is it's funded by non-users, if you like, and you divide that number by the patronage, you get some amazing numbers there as to how much those bus rides are subsidised. And I just did that little calculation last night. I think the best of them are around about $7 a ride. That's the subsidy. And the worst of them are over $40 a ride. And I just wonder whether that column, putting those figures into a column might be good from a transparency point of view, because it demonstrates just how much subsidy that there is there. And it also alerts us to the fact that there must be a point where a service is just not economic to run any longer. And there's two ways to fix that, and that's to get patronage up or costs down. And if you're tempted to do either of those things, that's good. But when it fails and you start showing that you're subsidising it to the extent that's just not acceptable anymore, I think that's worth knowing. And it will at least draw our attention to it so it can be challenged. So in future tables of this type, I think that would be a good thing to put in there. How much is being subsidised per ride?
Through you, Chair, and perhaps you can assist here. My understanding is a very healthy fare box recovery is third, it's 50%, which Taranaki, it's exceptionally healthy. In fact, we're one of the highest. So you would never achieve 100%, so we just have to be careful when we look at the numbers as to what is feasible and reasonable.
No, I get you'll never get 100%, and the CityLink in New Plymouth and the connector are probably up there with as good as any. Yeah. The other three, obviously, on the other end of the scale. But the point is that we have people come to us often and say, we want all of these things, we want all these services, and they're great, and we really demand them of you, and we buy into that. But what we're not actually, effectively saying, we want someone else to pay for our transport. What we're not saying is the other half of the people who actually pay for the service, we're not reflecting their contribution to it.
It's a bit like swimming pool costs.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks they're paying a huge amount to go to the swimming pool, but
everyone else is actually paying more.
Yeah. Everyone else is paying 80% of their cost.
Correct.
Yeah.
Or to hire a hall.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the counter argument to that is that we don't include that column every time we make a decision about the pools or the library or the stadium or whatever other thing that a proportion of our population uses, right? So I'm not sure that I would support that being included, actually, because I think it easily makes an argument to cut services that still do.
No, but surely you consider it when you're talking about fee charges and fare box recovery.
Yeah, I think you can probably make that on the numbers that are there now with that percentage of fare box.
I've managed to.
Yeah.
All I'm asking is, from a transparency point of view, does the average person who really has not a lot of knowledge of it truly understand how much this service is subsidised, whether it's ratepayer or FAR contribution, doesn't matter too much. Its bottom line is that there's a ratio between user and subsidy, and that's one I thought would be useful to put in there. But if you're not happy with it, that's fine. I'll give it a bit.
Just one other point I'd make is we set up, and this is in the NZTA thing, so when we have we have a couple of great services, they are used to fund community services. So when you look at the likes of the South Link, the Waverley to Hawara, for example, the great services prop that up because it's needed for vulnerable commuters. So I think you'd have to be careful at how you word subsidy on that one, where it's sort of set up to be balanced by better performers.
So, Chair, a couple of observations there, just picking up on expanding that last point that Cheryl was making. We have wellbeing obligations that go past the economic and into public transport. This is clearly one of our obligations is to provide services in our rural areas that, by any metric you would like to look at it, do not stack up. But there are obligations to do so, and some of those Southlink services are a classic example of that. If you're doing it strictly on economic basis, you just simply would not provide those services. So then you start to think about, how do we encourage more people to use those services? How do we improve that fare box recovery? How do we get more value for our spend in those areas? And you run into this continual conundrum. When you talk to those communities, they say, the service is once a week, it doesn't suit my timeframes, we need it to be more often, more frequent, and then we'd use it, and then we sit there and go, to invest more money and upping those services to meet those levels, but there's no patronage. It's a vicious circle. It really is a vicious circle. And they're very difficult conversations to have, but every time we talk to those communities, they do want to retain those services.
And I think,
Well, I've made the committee aware, that's all.
Yeah,
I think
we don't do this to make money.
You don't.
through that analysis that where you got the cost of it, I could think if you had a high frequency that had low numbers, and you had another one that was obviously looking at a higher frequency, you could possibly drop one back and pick up another with regard to getting more people on the bus and having a better bang for your buck, if you like, which is what was talked about. So I think keeping those in the back of your mind, of the actual costs or patronage numbers for each of the services will be critical for New Plymouth to decide is the best place to how they're serviced, and that would be something that will come out of New Plymouth, I would hope. Give us that idea. So, anything further with Cheryl at this stage?
Oh, I had a few questions on different parts of it. So just on the public transport project overview, the map there, I'm working off, not diligent, the PDF of the agenda, page 22. I'm just wondering, with the new network, how far down the track you are with figuring out frequencies of those routes, and whether the loop route is just running on weekends, or the proposed airport run, like where we're kind of at with the prioritisation of that, I guess.
So through you, Chair, Mike alluded to this before. We will have to take steps to get to the bronze network. So work is currently being done just to evaluate what those steps look like. So
okay. What does that mean practically?
It means we are preparing to not be able to launch the bronze in April, but a network that moves us to.
Right. So potentially some of those routes, like some of the current routes being changed to the new routes, but not all of those new routes being able to be established. Is that what?
Nearly, and also some of those routes being between the network that we run now and what we'd like. So we just have to look holistically.
Okay.
At the whole network. But we
so kind of going back to the drawing board.
Well, no, because we have a firm goal in mind. It's what can we afford?
Yeah.
How far can we get toward it? So,
okay.
So we absolutely are moving to. We're not starting again. We're just moving.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to think about too is, if the intention now is to launch a high frequency service at the same time as the new network, how do those two things work together, and how can we best figure that out?
Yes, so through future, I actually think it would be fabulous because we cannot offer that high frequency at the moment.
Yeah.
Near it.
But how do we make sure that there's some complementary, I guess landing those two things at the same time will be key, as you're figuring out which routes are possible within your funding and where the gaps are for the high frequency fees.
So one example is your suggestion that this will run that east-west corridor.
Yeah.
We potentially won't be able to do that straight off the bat. So it would be a really great test of your using your high frequency.
Yeah.
So Chair, may I make a suggestion that as Cheryl and the team work their way through those options and we get more clarity, we've only just received those figures in from the tenders and all the rest of it. So we are, as we speak, working through what those options look like. As we get a bit more certainty on that, maybe we do a briefing to this committee.
Yeah, that'd be good. Also, just wanted to raise on page 25 of the PDF, sorry. In paragraph 30, it's talking about aligning public transport services with some of the public transport infrastructure that the district councils are in charge of in terms of, that route prioritisation and parking and, making sure that those levers are all pulled at the same time. So just, I guess, I'd be keen to see this committee as we go forward have some of those conversations as well from a New Plymouth perspective anyway, of what does the regional council need, particularly as we move hopefully into the bronze, then silver, then gold phases. What would be helpful from your perspective to have at a district council level? So, just, I guess, opening the door to that conversation, because I think that's really important as we improve and want to improve the public transport services.
Nothing further, Amanda?
Just the routes of the high frequency trial. I don't know whether we want to have that discussion now or when we look at the MPDC paper. Are you going to say something, Henry?
Yeah, I was going to say something on that issue as well. Clearly, we don't have the funding available to put in place an effective high-frequency trial. Even if we used an existing route and added a few more services, we're going to find it very hard to actually measure in any meaningful way whether or not the additional money has provided a benefit or not. And it does seem to me that unless we have a completely new standalone service that is new and is high frequency, so that we can actually see what patterns emerge, then we are tossing money at something without actually being able to measure the result. So I'd be much more in favour of putting that money aside until the point where, as things improve in the government's funding mechanisms, we're able to put in place a service and then use it, rather than have it disappear into other things. Which may mean that we just have to hold off any high frequency trial for the current period.
So priority for a high frequency trial isn't at the expense of another route or a change of another route?
Yeah, if we simply tack another bus or two onto an existing route, we're going to find it very hard, I think, to calculate what the effect has been. If you start a new route with a high frequency route, you will be able to see fairly quickly, I would imagine, change in patterns and whether that works out to be better for the travelling public.
Like what I was trying to get at, would you look at a high frequency route to see if it was going to work at the expense of what's planned?
Well, I think there may be some routes now that are low patronage that have that could sustain the route with fewer services, but you would have to survey the people on that route to look at that. the people who use that route to look at that. Because if you're going to fund a high frequency trial, the money has to come from somewhere.
I understand.
And there's clearly not enough in the
that-
existing system.
That's why I was saying, would you be happy to see it at the expense of something else?
I
Because you
think we
can't.
would have to. I think we
And
would
you
have
think
to
it would
look
be-
at,
Well, that's probably a discussion that needs to be had. with-
and it may
Yeah.
be that we have to amalgamate a couple of routes in some way, or change routes in some way to get a saving which would enable us to put in place that trial.
I guess the way that I look at it is that the options that we last time explored, so that option 1, 2, 3, the
Paragraph
The-
32, is it?
paragraph 32,
Yeah.
both option 1 and at this point option 3, potentially outside the window of funding that NPDC put aside in the LTP. And the only one that at the moment is fitting into that funding is option 2, but option 2 has this problem of difficulty in measuring the impact of the high frequency part, I guess, and also isn't necessarily the cross-town piece that we were looking for. But I'm just wondering whether with the changes that are going to need to be made to the kind of bronze network that we were trying to get to anyway, is there an option 4 that we can still explore? I know it's more work, but I want to put the funding into something that
It's meaningful.
yeah,
Essentially.
just want to make sure that the funding's going towards something that, I would be concerned that if we put funding into something that isn't necessarily best practice or as close to best practice as we can get, we kind of disprove the theory before we even start,
So through you, Chair, can I just ask, I understood that we had an option 4 and increased funding available for it, which is in Stuart's.
Yeah, so, yeah, okay, yeah.
So we're proposing a high frequency trial option, where Harry was explaining, which we got to at the end of last year, because budget gap. Now, we have the potential for more funding, which would bridge that gap via the higher frequency service. So we'd like to get that ground-proofed. I sort of get ahead of myself with my report, but want to ground-proof that and get that price by the incumbent operator. See where that cost falls, to see what is doable and what's not doable. There's been a lot, as everywhere, there's been cost escalations in the cost of contracted services, but we're hopeful that based on the estimate that the operator gave for our original preferred option, which was the Fitzroy to City, the hospital, that, it is doable. So this, Harry was in our last meeting, we were looking at this a new option which you weren't there. So.
Yeah. Okay. Anything further? I'll take it, I'll put the recommendation that.
Just sorry, Chair. Page 27, rebranding. Is there any indicative cost at this stage on the rebranding?
It's within the current promotional funding budget, but they haven't got back with a quote as of yet, but it's certainly not going to be over the top.
Very good. Page 29, when we're talking about that public cost going through and talking of the various ways where there can be efficiencies and optimisation in this world of everyone saying that the cheapest is electric and there's trials of hydrogen and that, we're obviously not talking about investigating anything like that.
So through UT, yes, the procurement absolutely asked for a carbon zero plan, if you will, moving to either electric or exploring hydrogen.
Yep.
And all of the
Okay.
tenders.
Yeah, I was a bit surprised that it wasn't actually mentioned in there. And the last one, just a comment at the bottom of page 30, the very last, and point 30, just in that last sentence, obviously when they're talking about parking controls and pricing makes it easy for a private vehicle, they weren't talking about New Plymouth.
Yeah, true.
Exactly.
We did come across that and we decided a $20 parking fee in New Plymouth could certainly boost public transport. So that could be a decision New Plymouth could make.
We've already seen an $800,000 drop in parking revenue, so.
So Chair, and this is the conundrum. This is where you're trying to align all these levers. And it's like a massive jigsaw puzzle. You're just trying to put it all together to come up with a beautiful picture. But it is, you know, you increase parking charges over there, your revenue drops over there, you get a public backlash, you get a public backlash from those that want to drive and those that want to are shouting in the streets. It is a.
But I'd suggest NZTA has been very clear. We must use both push and pull levers if we expect to then go to the cap in hand. We have to have explored everything and high strong messages, parking and those things, and that's what I'm hoping can happen.
Yeah, that we can have those conversations.
Could I ask one more question on the utilisation of services? If you look at the Southlink, Taranaki, Hawera, and the Waverley Hawera routes, they're both relatively low patronage, but very, I think, valued by the people who use them. And it would strike me that perhaps the operating costs of those services, when you look at the fare percentage, might mean that a more suitable vehicle might be desirable.
It is a shuttle.
It is a shuttle bus already? Yeah, okay, so that we're already maximised.
Everything we can.
Definitely. Yeah, okay.
Can I just have one more?
Just before you do that, I think Susan has to leave us and has to disappear. So, Susan, we're happy if you need to take off. Anything you'd like to
See you
add
later,
before you
guys.
leave?
I look forward to our next meeting.
Thank you, Susan.
Thanks, Susan.
Amanda, sorry, back to you.
Thank you. Maybe a question for you, Linda, just the last paragraph of the report, page 42, around the bike racks. Do we have a time frame for those being reintroduced?
So my understanding at the moment is that we're all good now to progress with the providers during the day, but we've still got to work through the nighttime component.
We don't really have any
I can.
many night.
We're doing that work now on the buses.
Okay,
So I'll be up
cool.
and running shortly.
Great. Thank you.
Anything further? I take it not, so thank you, Cheryl, Mike and the team. And I would like to move the recommendation that we receive the memorandum on the public transport services update. Councillor Nixon, Mayor Nixon, sorry, and I'll happily second that. I'll put all those in favour, please, aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried, thank you very much. Move on to item 11 in the agenda, which is actually the updates from there will be the updates from the three TAs. The first one, Stratford District Council, an update on public transport matters you'll find from page 29 in your agenda. And I'm not sure whether Yvonski want to introduce it or Mike is going to cover it off. It's only up to you, or?
Thank you. The only comment I'd make was this is written in the past tense. In actual fact, none of this has happened. Not quite sure who wrote it or how it got there, but the discussion points, number 2, where it talks about were presented to the Policy and Services Committee meeting. It actually will be, not has been. And then I have seen that report, and the community will be given an opportunity for feedback. That's provided it goes through council, and presume it will, and be implemented sometime after that, which certainly won't be in May. But hopefully it'll get approved. It'll actually be quite a novel thing. I think it's actually the first bus stop in Stratford, other than ones outside of school or the current one outside the library. So this will be the
Kia kaha.
purpose-built standalone bus stop. So I'm sure someone will have a view on that, but we'll see how it goes.
Yes, one's plural. Yeah.
It even beat the traffic lights, so thank you.
Last time we considered our deputy mayor made a deputation, so it got quite interesting.
About bus stops.
About bus stops outside his place. It's all good fun.
But this, Chair, is a serious point on bus stops and infrastructure. That again comes to this wider picture of who's pulling different levers. So when we start looking at spatial plans or district plans or whatever, that ability to require public transport infrastructure when a subdivision's approved and it's built. So this retrofitting of infrastructure is really difficult. People do not want a bus stop outside their house.
Just so that you know, that's been fed into the planning team at NPDC is doing kind of omnibus district plan change, and that's been included as one of the points that they're looking at.
And that's the power of this committee, to consider those, bring together the different parties.
I think just on that, Mike, I think the practical implications of what seems a very simple thing like painting some yellow lines might not actually be so simple, in the sense that someone will come along and say, well, if there's people using the connector bus, they may well drive to the bus stop and then get on the bus, because as a pensioner you can travel for nothing. So you might drive to the bus stop and then get a free ride and come home.
Yeah, you have them every 400 metres to do that.
Yeah. So where do you park your
The next paper.
where do you park your car? And I was saying, on my front lawn, no way. Yeah. So all things kind of look simple, but they're not always.
At least there is planning going in and stuff's happening. So with that, would you like to move your report? Move Olski from the council.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm happy to second it. Any comments? Just put all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Yes, carried. Move on to item 12 on the agenda, which is tab 12, the Plymouth District Council report on public transport. I think you'll find about page, not 30, it's not 30, it's 35. There's a very good report here.
Through the chair,
Sure.
I can take it as read. I just really want to highlight those 2 points. One is the high frequency service. So this is really to give, I guess, customers a taste of, I guess, the silver. It's not really a gold service yet because it's still only 20-minute frequency throughout the day. But obviously we need to work with the incumbent operator initially to get it priced and ground-proofed along Deptford Street, east and west, and between Fitzroy and Langton. And obviously, there's this issue, sometimes bus drivers don't like making right turns onto main roads and things like that. So it's really about ironing out the doability of those things. And I guess a fallback option is also still the Fitzroy CBD to our hospital, because we have already got information from the operator about that and the cost of it. So it's really just taking that extra step to find out, and then we can start working with Cheryl on how that would fit into the tenders you've got, and whether there's economies of scale in terms of additional buses being required or not, over and above what's being supplied as part of the tender process. So those are some sort of more detailed things we need to work out. But I am hopeful, since we've found some additional funding for that we can get the trial going. The other thing I just wanted to highlight was the integrated transport framework. As you know, it was approved by our council, adopted at its December meeting. It's been uploaded into NZTA's TO system, and we also want to bring it here at some future date just to get some support and principle. TRC officers were part of the whole project team for that, as were officers from the NZTA. And as part of that process, we also developed a road transport model which tested various scenarios, including significantly increasing the provision of public transport by 200 and 400%. So we really just over the forecast years of 2035 and 2053. So that's I guess a 10-year and a nearly 30-year planning period. And obviously public transport is one of the main levers that we can use to actually address a lot of the issues arising from future congestion that we experience, particularly on approaches to New Plymouth from the east on State Highway 3 and also on the one-way system. But along with other measures such as has already been noted, parking prices, and probably some future time of use congestion charging, which the government is already looking at for the main metro areas, and I think at some stage in the future it may be brought into provincial centres. So that was quite interesting, and you know, really what we're trying to do here, it's really the bigger picture of making New Plymouth and the satellites more livable cities. There's a lot of externalities associated with our current mode split between, you know, how we're very focused on car driving, but just getting a 10 or 15% mode shift at peak times makes all the difference in how we manage the congestion. And that's generally not accounted for, so you know, that's the benefit of investing in public transport is lower emissions, reduce congestion, better health for the people who use it because they tend to walk further. So there's a lot of benefits that don't generally get counted into that commercial equation which we discussed earlier. So that's why we do it and accept that there is always going to be a subsidy there. So that's something that we're keen to trial, obviously with our high frequency test, to see how that works out. In a past life, I worked at the Otago Regional Council. We looked at a similar high frequency trial from North East Valley down to St Clair, and that's really become their main successful route. In fact, it ended up being operated purely commercially for a while. It was so successful. So I expect, you know, this east-west route cutting right through the centre of the CBD, you know, to me it bodes well. And some of the other things about the city centre strategy, that, you know, we do have a future vision of more people living there. We need to support the city centre businesses and having more people living there will work, increasingly pedestrianising and opening it up to the coast better. All those things are important. Public transport is one of the catalysts to actually make that happen and improve the land value uptake. So, you know, there is a future. Other cities have done it, so I think one can't be wrong as well. We haven't forgotten about all the satellite towns and that. We, as part of our model, we also looked at the changes that are required there. So there's a whole list of interventions that we have within the ITF, which we're obviously wanting to publicise a bit more, talk with the local boards, etc. about those. Parking, it's on the list, but you know, after a recent restructure, we're just determining where that's going to sit as a priority with all the other things. Taking questions.
Thank you. Fantastic report. Well covered. Any questions with regard to the report?
Just a comment. I mean, we're hearing, you know, a lot in previous stuff on the agenda today. It's a lot easier in New Plymouth, I think, to organise buses as it is in cities compared to the rest of the region. So we're going to really battle in a lot of places trying to get people out of cars to be able to make it work. And so we've got huge, I mean, it must be a very, very different conversation when you're sitting in Auckland or Wellington, Christchurch, having these discussions. So it's certainly always going to be a challenge. Just a question on the technicality. The other two reports we're going to receive a note, but this one, to me, is an interesting recommendation, and where that came from, that having considered all matters raised in this report, the report will be noted.
That's just our standard MPDC wording.
Oh, it's your fault.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's
one of
good.
many things, I'm sure.
Thank you.
We've probably got a lawyer in the background
That
somewhere.
explains it. No, she's gone.
No. At our end. We've probably got a lawyer in the background somewhere.
Yeah.
Chair, the joys of a joint committee of different organisations preparing
Yep.
reports and putting them together.
Through the chair,
So,
would you
Chair, so
prefer-
just, sorry,
would
just
you prefer doing it through the format of TRC? I mean, I wasn't sure whether.
That's fine.
it's all good.
We're more concerned about the content.
Content.
Okay, so no problem at all at this end.
The observation I make in the discussions that have gone around the country on increasing the private share are hitting our metros the hardest. Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch are the ones that are having the most pain. So even in those high population centres where you have much better public services and much better frequency than we have in our provincial centres, they still struggle to get people on board and still struggle to get the private share fare box rates up. It is not an easy game.
Okay.
Enough alone.
And you think if you think of Wellington in particular, if you can't make public transport work in Wellington, it just will not work anywhere in New Zealand, because you've got people coming from 3 or 4 different directions into one location in the morning, and in the evening they all turn around and go back out. If that's as simple as it gets. You can't do that in Auckland or Christchurch, and even then they struggle to make that work.
And yet here in Taranaki, the Hawara to New Plymouth is our problem child in that it is so busy, we've had to put 2 extra buses on it and we need another. So it's actually our success story.
Well, I was going to say that's a good problem to have.
It's a great problem to have.
So there's still latent demand even with the increased services.
The buses are full. Simple as that.
I've heard that actually from a lot of Inglewood residents, or a number of Inglewood residents. Like by the time it gets to Inglewood, they're full, and
We have a backup bus that comes through from Stratford to make sure that we don't leave anyone behind.
right. Oh, that's awesome.
And sometimes you see 2 or 3 buses in quick
Yep.
succession.
Yeah.
Every morning.
I don't see that as a problem at all.
Yeah.
If you're a
No, it's
victim of your success, I think it's a great thing. And,
Yeah.
and when that project the connector bus was first mooted many years ago, which was a Stratford District Council initiative of mine.
Well done.
And there was some doubt whether it would be
THB, if I
successful. And
recall.
I'm delighted to see that it has been so successful. But the issue that you have getting people on buses from our district, and this will apply to South as well, is that if all of the people that live rural are effectively excluded from using the bus, and the reason for that is that they have to travel to the bus, and they've got to travel quite substantial distances in some cases. So if you've travelled a quarter hour or half an hour to get to here, you're highly unlikely to actually get out of your car and get on a bus and then go somewhere else, and you just keep on going. So that's the fundamental problem. They're not in close proximity to the start point. They've got to drive either end of it, and it just makes no sense to them. Yeah. So, and that's going to be the case of any rural or sparsely populated area. So,
If they were travelling from here to New Plymouth and there was a heavy congestion charge, they might change their tune and hop on a bus in Stratford. So there could be changes, and there are always options. Yeah, just say the connector bus was a good service. It was a Stratford Council, I remember, put in the funding to get that off the ground and came and sat around here and negotiated to get that to work. I remember those talks, and it's worked well. So there can be more suggestions and ideas obviously come up, and partial funding options. So we'll look forward to those. So with that, we will go with the recommendation from page 25 that we receive the report and note the report from the New Plymouth District Council Public Transport Related Matters. I'm happy to move that. Is there a seconder? Councillor Joinhoven. Those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much. And South Taranaki District Council. Anything you'd like to highlight or?
Okay, so I guess really our only one on passenger service at the moment, due to our town revitalisations, we're building a green space in Opanaki, so we're closing the end of Napier Street, right against Surf Highway 45, and it required moving a bus stops. And it has taken quite a while, and we have been waiting several months now for 4 signatures from someone, and we were talking earlier about a Wonder Man or a Wonder Woman. Well, we found that one yesterday, and within an hour of reporting a problem, the problem was solved, and the 2 bus stops are now being ticked off. The what would I call it? The westbound one is going to be outside the courthouse, and the eastbound one is going to be outside the police station, so they're almost opposite each other. So thank you very much to you, Linda, for making that happen yesterday. You were superwoman. That happened very quick and efficiently. Was really good. So they're just waiting now to be gazetted. So I guess the next question is, do I need to keep you on speed dial? Because how long will that process take?
That is not a straightforward process, but we have everything that we need to make it happen. You always have me on speed dial, though. So that's anytime, yeah. But that, apologies for how long that took. It should not have.
Yep.
Solved.
You ring and she'll pack it.
Thank you. We really don't have anything else.
And the other thing I'll add is that we're currently under and the other thing is so they could feature and ultimately it's obviously long and look after the strategy so we're hoping to be able to highlight at the moment it's on lock here.
Excellent, thank you.
Happy to move.
Happy to move. I'll happily second the recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. That brings us to the end. Are there any other items that people would like to touch on before we close with our closing karakia? Take it not. We'll end the meeting then with a closing karakia, and we do have some hot crosses and a coffee if you would like to stay. So we'd like to follow on. Uru mai, aroa, ahokaha, ahomai, ki ora, ki raro, ki roto, ki wao, rere rere, pai mai. Thank you very much for your attendance, and we will look forward to a date